sometimes controversial, always politically incorrect, and pro-life without exception, without compromise, and without apology. It's the Pro-Life America podcast with your hosts, Sarah Waits and the president of Life Dynamics, Mark Crutcher.
Hello, guys. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Mark Crutcher, as you heard. As you also heard, lurking nearby is my worthy co-host, Sarah Waits.
Hello, everyone. We have a listener question.
Yeah, and we always encourage people to write in their questions or comments or show ideas. If you have a show you'd like to see us do or a topic you'd like to see us cover, let us know. We're here to serve you. But
We'd
anyway,
love to hear from you guys. We get a lot of listener stuff, and we may not necessarily identify it, but this time we wanted to let this listener know that we have answered their question. So this question is from Suzette. She says, I work for a pro-life organization. I'm having a hard time with the response, I know it's a human life that's being ended, but I'm okay with that. And the most concerning part is I'm hearing this from teenagers and young adults. How do I respond to that? I'm always left speechless.
Okay. Back in the early days, they claimed it wasn't a human life or it wasn't a human being or it wasn't a person or all sorts of things. And our argument always was that it was a human life. Mm-hmm. What else could it be? You know, It's not a parrot.
It's not a plant.
Or a parrot.
It's not a fruit.
Or a kangaroo or something. But our argument always was that these people are so morally bankrupt that they wouldn't care if it was a human life.
Yeah.
And now many of them are openly at saying that. Yeah, it's a human life. We understand. And I've even heard pro-abort say, yes, I know it's a baby.
It's despicable, but at least they're being intellectually honest about it being a living human being. You'll encounter a number of pro-choicers who will try to argue that it's not. They know they're lying. We know they're lying.
In this case, the person is saying they really don't care if it's a living human being or not. And I've encountered this on some events that I've been in. And I'll always say, okay, fine, I understand that. But if it doesn't matter that the unborn child's a living human being, why does it matter that anybody else is? In other words, why should we have laws against murder? Mm-hmm. If you're comfortable saying, yes, the unborn child's a living human being, but I'm okay with killing them, what other living human beings do you think it should be okay to kill?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can't let them off the hook. Say, no, you have to answer that question because you're the one who laid out the standard that it doesn't matter that these are living human beings. Why would it matter if somebody kills their 5-year-old or their wife or their husband or whoever?
Or the elderly, or go down the list.
If the humanity of the unborn is irrelevant, why is the humanity of anybody else relevant? Mm-hmm. So you've got to hold their feet to the fire on that.
Well, and I would say that getting those people to say that I know it's a human life and I'm okay with it being killed is really good when you're having these kind of discussions when there's other people around, because
that's the only time it's good. Yeah.
Generally, most people who are around them will go, whoa, wait a minute.
Right.
If this is the pro-choice position, wait a minute.
Right. Well, it is the pro-choice position.
Yeah.
And it's another example of how these people are totally immoral. If they can make that statement, if they can look at an unborn child and say, yeah, they're human, but I don't have a problem killing them.
So part 2 to Suzette's question was, also, are there any sources to show that pregnancy is safer than abortion? I often get the remark that says abortion is safer than birth, and they provide sources. I'm having problems finding sources that say otherwise.
Well, first off, the sources that they provide will be somebody tied to the abortion industry. They'll cite Guttmacher or they'll cite some other pro-abortion organization.
Or as we've talked about on this show, they'll cite CDC studies that, as we've covered in the past, are flawed.
When you hear this argument, it's a classic example of that old statement, figures don't lie, but liars do figure.
Yeah.
But the most important thing to understand is that the baby does die.
Mm-hmm. So it's never safe for the baby.
It's never safe for the baby.
Yeah.
The intent is to take the life of that child. Mm-hmm. And they don't want you to acknowledge that. They don't want to talk about that. That's to be ignored. But one of the things that's interesting here is, and we don't have time, obviously, in a show like this to go over all of the information out there, but it's available. You can find it.
You may have to stop using Google.
when they're comparing a complication of a pregnancy, in other words, it's dangerous for the woman to give birth, you're talking about a very, very late term. It's obviously the end of the term, right?
Most times. There's some premature babies.
But nonetheless, that's the end of the term.
Yeah.
Right there. But they want to compare that to early term abortions. 90% of all abortions are happen before 12 weeks. And those are safer than later abortions. So if you lump all of those in, then that brings the aggregate down, and it makes it appear that abortion is safer. If you break it down by gestational age, one of the things that you see, and you can find this out there, is that the crossing point is about 16 weeks. Everything that I have seen, and we studied this extensively, we studied a lot back when I did Lyme 5, is that before 16 weeks, mathematically, abortion is safer than childbirth. But after that, then abortion is more dangerous. So you have to compare apples to apples, and if you're going to make this comparison. Also, one of the things that the abortion industry does when they make this ludicrous comparison is they ignore the long-term complications.
Oh, yeah. They're not even counting the connection between breast cancer. They're not considering cervical scarring and the impact that can have on later pregnancies. Uterine
scarring is clearly known to be a cause of placenta previa, which is a very dangerous situation in future pregnancies. And like you said, you mentioned the breast cancer.
Yeah.
There's all manner of evidence out there, especially in foreign studies where you don't have the pro-abortion bias that you have here, that shows that abortion of a first-term, particularly a first-time pregnancy, increases the rate of breast cancer, sometimes quite dramatically.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, you have the issues with placenta previa and Asherman syndrome, and there's several others. There's also some evidence out there, and I want to do a study of this one day when we have the funding and the staff to do it.
Hint, hint, wink, wink, for anybody out there.
Right. There's some evidence that an abortion increases the risk of health problems for any future babies you have. For example, cerebral palsy.
Interesting.
There's some evidence out there that if you've had an abortion, future pregnancies are more likely to produce a child with cerebral palsy than they are if you don't have an abortion. There's also the psychological damage.
Oh, absolutely.
That the American abortion lobby has been very good, just like in the breast cancer situation. They've been very good at tamping that down and making it appear that it doesn't exist.
And women have paid the price for that.
Well, women always pay the price for legalized abortion. That's why the early feminists were all pro-life. They recognize that it doesn't serve women, it serves sexually irresponsible and sexually predatory males. But the psychological damage, they want you to think that every woman who has an abortion is just for the rest of her life tickled to death. It was the best decision they ever made. What I'd like to see is this study done. Let's say that you put together a cohort of women to study who, let's say, got pregnant in high school. So they had an unplanned and much unwanted pregnancy at some point in their life. At a young age. And let's say you take 100,000 of those women, and 50,000 of them had abortions and 50,000 of them gave birth. Go study those women and ask the 50,000 that gave birth if they now wish they'd had an abortion. And ask the 50,000 that had an abortion if they now wish they'd given birth instead. And I guarantee you the second group is going to be 100 to 1 larger than the first group.
Well, you talk about the pro-choice community wants everybody to think that women are okay with having their abortions and they don't have any psychological impacts. If you look at the composition of the pro-life movement, a large chunk of the pro-life movement are women who have had abortions.
That's right.
They have seen firsthand what abortion does, and they don't want anybody else to go through that. They like to make this out as a whole bunch of misogynistic men who just want women barefoot in the kitchen pregnant, when that's not the reality of what the pro-life movement generally is.
No. And on this deal of psychological damage, and I've said a moment ago about how in some foreign countries, even though they may have legalized abortion, there's not this abortion bias that you see in the United States. And one example of that, talking about the psychological damage, there was a study, and I think it was in Finland, about suicide rates among women who'd had abortions versus women who didn't have abortions. And what they found out is that in later years, after their long time after their abortions, the suicide rate, if I remember right, was like 2.3 times as high for women who'd had abortions versus women who didn't have abortions.
Yeah.
And that's in a country where the debate over abortion is not like it is here. It's much smoother there, for lack of a better word. It's wrong.
Yeah.
But it's not as vitriolic as it is here. So it's going to be worse here than there.
Yeah. Well, I've seen studies showing all sorts of connections to women who have had abortions, like drug use, for example, depression. One thing that we talked about before on the podcast, which is
anniversary reaction.
Bizarre behaviors on the anniversary of their abortions.
Right. exactly. We've seen a lot of that. Back when we were doing the malpractice suits, that was one of the things that we would always ask about. And a lot of these women would have bizarre behaviors that they didn't even tie to the abortion. They didn't even think about it, but it would be on the 1-year anniversary or the 5-year anniversary of the abortion. And I'll tell you something else is, if these people think there's not a psychological component to this, one of the things that I have always found fascinating is that when you ask women who've had abortions what the due date of their baby was going to be, they know it.
Yeah.
Now, what does that tell you? That tells you they were bonding with that baby. They knew when that baby was coming.
That date mattered to them.
And I have talked to women that had abortions 25 years earlier that told me that they said they could remember the due date of the baby that they aborted. And I've talked to a lot of these women, and suicide is a real issue here. And again, we don't study this because we don't want to know the answers.
Exactly.
There is an enormous amount of intellectual dishonesty among the abortion lobby.
And that goes over, too, to how they treat miscarriages as well. We did a really good interview recently about that, and I will put the link to that in the description.
A good example of this not wanting to know the answer is we were one of the first organizations to put out anything years and years ago on the link between abortion and breast cancer. And we put out a study called Connections. And the argument in Connections that we made, and we showed all the medical studies that had been done showing that there is a potential link between abortion and breast cancer. Our argument was not that abortion causes breast cancer. Our argument was that there was enough evidence out there that abortion does cause breast cancer to warrant a big study on it, a government-sponsored, full-fledged study of whether abortion causes breast cancer. We couldn't get any takers on that. We bought a mailing list of every breast cancer research organization in America. And I think at the time there were like 742 of them.
Is that how you got connected up with Angela Lane French?
That's how we first met her. She read that, and that's what turned her on to this argument.
We have a good interview with her. I'll put the link to that in the description as well.
Yeah. Anyway, we sent this to all these breast cancer research organizations, and we were not asking them to look at the data and conclude that abortion causes breast cancer.
Yeah.
We were asking them,
Does
do
this
you
warrant a
believe,
look?
does this warrant a further look?
Yeah.
We got virtually no responses to this.
That's bizarre.
Now, one of the largest breast cancer research organizations, of course, is Susan G. Komen.
Who for a long time was donating to Planned Parenthood.
Right.
In fact, that huge stink that got kicked up is when they tried to stop funding Planned Parenthood. And Planned Parenthood went out and made an example of them.
It was the largest breast cancer research organization in the country.
Yeah.
And they happen to be headquartered in Dallas. So I thought I would just, since we're not getting any response to this mailing that we did, I'm going to call them and say, did you get the Connections book? And
try talking to them.
They put me in touch with the person there that would be doing that, this woman I talked to. And she said, yes, she got it. And I said, did you read it? And she said, yeah, I read it. And she said, it's just pro-life propaganda. And I said, well,
what part of it?
Can you tell me? Because I said it was reviewed by 3 physicians to make sure we weren't saying anything that was medically incorrect. I said, so can you give me a part of it that you could say that we made a bad conclusion or that what we were saying was not true? Well, it's just pro-life propaganda. I'm not going to comment on that. And I said, do you think it at least warrants further investigation? We didn't prove that abortion causes breast cancer. We weren't trying to. Does it warrant further investigation? And she says, no. And I'm thinking, well, now here is the large, if you came up with a study that said McDonald's hamburgers causes breast cancer, if you had nothing to base it on, they'd have no problem with saying, yeah, we ought to study that.
Yeah.
If there's any evidence out there that breast cancer is caused by McDonald's hamburgers, we have an obligation to study that. But in this case, she made it clear to me, we are not looking at this. This is pro-life propaganda.
That's a commitment to your ideology.
I asked her, I said, do you know that because you've studied this before? I'm just telling you it's pro-life propaganda. She would never answer any of the questions. Finally, she hung up on me. The conversation deteriorated from there. But it was the incredible intellectual dishonesty. And what I discovered from talking to this woman, and I suspect this is true about a lot of these breast cancer organizations, they're cash cows. That has nothing to do with breast cancer. They don't care one way or the other about breast cancer.
Yeah.
It's a cash cow. They can go to Congress and they can get all kinds of funding They can go to the American people and say, oh, do these marches and all this and this pink thing, and go to the Major League Baseball and get them to paint bats pink and get $100 for every home run that's hit. They can do all of that stuff to raise money, but it's about money. It has nothing at all to do with breast cancer. And Susan G. Komen couldn't care one way or the other about breast cancer.
Well, I'm not sure I completely 100% agree with you. I do believe it's about money, but I think it shows that they don't necessarily care about the causes of breast cancer. They're more than willing to help treat the breast cancer. But if this just turns out to be the largest cause of breast cancer, they're completely willing to just accept that because of their political position.
Well, one of the examples that we gave on this was that breast cancer rates are much higher among black women. Mm-hmm. Well, black women make up 13% of the population, they have 40% of the abortion.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you want to look at that? But
Absolutely.
they don't. But they don't. They want to look at poverty. You'll hear them say all the time, we need to look at the reasons that women live in poverty and then have higher breast cancer rates or whatever.
Well, they're always constantly talking about African-American women, maternal mortality, but they're not looking at these things.
They don't care.
I think it's just about having that card that they can throw down.
You want to think, and you said you don't 100% agree with me necessarily. Mm-hmm. That's because
I'm young.
You want to think that their hearts are in the right places when they're not.
Not necessarily. For a lot of people, it is about research. For a lot of people, it is about money. I think they're perfectly happy researching all these treatments, but they don't want any research into causes, because if that means that abortion gets painted in a bad light and abortion goes away,
they'd rather have women have breast cancer.
They would rather have women have breast cancer due to abortion than get rid of abortion.
That's right. That's exactly right. And it just shows, again, the incredible intellectual dishonesty of the abortion lobby. And believe me, organizations like Susan G. Komen are part of the abortion lobby. Mm-hmm. They'll never admit it, but they are. And we saw that. You're talking about when this woman was the head of Susan G. Komen and wanted to stop giving money to Planned Parenthood. They got rid of her right off the bat.
Yeah.
And then made it clear that they were going to continue giving money to Planned Parenthood.
The fact that they gave money to Planned Parenthood always boggled my mind. Planned Parenthood does not do mammograms. If it's warranted, they will refer you to somebody else who can do mammograms or further studying. So basically, they're getting that money to make a phone call.
Yep.
Why wouldn't you be giving that money to somebody who could actually pay for those breast cancer screenings and more comprehensive screenings and treatments? It makes the most sense. It's not about politics.
Yeah, it's this whole breast cancer research industry, which we discovered when we were writing Connections, and it is an industry, is a cash cow. And let me tell you what put me onto this. My best friend was a nephrologist, a doctor of internal medicine. He owns a dialysis center. Mm-hmm. And he was telling me that this whole breast cancer research thing is a scam. Mm-hmm. And he's kind of a cynical character anyway.
So you're just like, sure, whatever.
And then when we were doing Connections, and then the results we got from these breast cancer research organizations, especially Komen, I thought, it is a scam. And so I started looking at it. And what was interesting is talking about going to Congress and getting money. Mm-hmm. That's what Roger was telling me. He said, this is a cash cow. These people make billions of dollars off scaring people about breast cancer. And he said, one thing you need to look at, for example, is the relationship between breast cancer funding and prostate cancer funding. Mm-hmm. Men die at a higher rate from prostate cancer than women die from breast cancer.
Yes.
At the time when we were doing Connections, we looked at the federal funding for breast cancer research versus prostate cancer research. Breast cancer research were getting $11 for every $1 that was going to prostate cancer research.
Wow. That's a huge difference.
Right. And when you started looking at it, you say, well, this can only be because of bias. What Congress knows, what every congressman knows, if a bill is put before us to fund some kind of breast cancer research, and I vote against it,
they'll make it seem like they're sexist.
They're going to target me, and they're going to tell every woman in my district that I don't care if women get breast cancer, and I'm going to get beat. So they vote for it. Mm-hmm. The same thing doesn't happen, for example, in the case of prostate cancer research. But one last thing before we wrap this up. If these people believe that abortion is safer than childbirth, if they honestly believe that,
Which they don't.
They know better. Mm-hmm. They know it better than we do. Mm-hmm. But if they honestly believe that, why aren't they suggesting that all pregnancies be aborted? Mm-hmm. That would really help with the carbon footprint deal.
Or instead of safe, legal, and rare, childbirth, safe, legal, and rare.
Right.
If abortion is the way to go.
It seems to me that they would be championing a law that would require every physician in the world, or in America, when they give a woman a positive pregnancy test, to also tell her that it's in her best interest to have an abortion, because abortion is safer than childbirth.
Yeah.
And if you don't do that, you'd be committing malpractice. Obviously, right?
Obviously. I mean, if the stats show it.
Right. If the stats show that abortion is safer than childbirth, then every doctor should be required to encourage women to have abortions if they're pregnant.
My guess is they don't want people looking at those stats too carefully.
They don't want them looking at it. The pro-aborts know this is true, but these are the kind of lies that they tell, that they have to tell in order to maintain legalized abortion.
Yeah.
Anyway, I hope that helps with Suzette's
questions,
dilemmas here.
Sorry we didn't give you the exact places where you could find this stuff, but there's just so much stuff out there. So
yeah, I mean, if you're truly interested in this, do the research, and it's out there. You can find it. Like I said, we came across it all when we were writing Line 5, and then on some other projects that we'd done later.
You might also want to check out Line 5 for anybody who hasn't read it. It's really good information. At the back of the book, there's a whole bunch of sources and citations that might give you a good place to go from there.
Right. And Line 5 has a whole chapter on the breast cancer link.
Yeah.
And the medical studies that have been done to show that.
We'll put the link to that in the description so that anybody who's interested can go check that out.
Yeah.
It's $6.95 and, of course, free shipping.
Right.
So.
And it will tell you what the abortion industry's like. And I have questions from people. They'll say, well, you wrote that in 1996. Does it still apply today?
Absolutely.
That's absolutely. Nothing that's in there is better today, and some things are worse.
Yeah. At the end of Suzette's question, she says, love listening to your podcast and thank you for all you do. Well, thank you, Suzette, for sending in your question, and thank you and everybody who listens to the podcast.
And we did a whole show on her suggestion.
We didn't intend for it to be, but that's just kind of how it wound up.
Now, by the way, Suzette, there will not be a check in the mail. We don't pay for these just because we got out of the show. So don't be standing by your mailbox waiting on the check. But we do appreciate it. And anybody else out there that has a issue like this that they want to see us discuss, or a question they want us to answer, please send them in, because we're here to serve you.
Well, and we try to come up with topics and stuff that's good for a wide demographic. So people who have been in the pro-life movement for a long time, or people who are new to this. But sometimes we overlook those questions about things that new people have that we don't think to discuss.
Yeah, it's very tempting, especially when you're like me and you've been in it for almost 40 years. You have this tendency to think, when something comes up, you think, well, hey, everybody knows that. We covered that 25 years ago. Yeah, but this person that's asking is 19 years old. They were 6 years away from being born when you were discussing that.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of start over every once in a while to make sure that you're catching all the new people that are coming in. And we certainly want to do that. It's kind of like when guys get drafted into the NFL. You know, if a guy gets drafted into the NFL, he probably played pee-wee football, and then he played junior high football, and he played high school football, and he played college football. And every time he played football, they went over the basics. Now he gets into the NFL, and you know what they do?
Basics.
They go over the basics again, because you've got to reaffirm them every time. You've got to keep those in your mind.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're playing at a whole lot bigger level, but the basics are still the same.
Yeah.
Well, we have to, in this area, go over the basics once in a while, and not think that just because we learned it 25 years ago, that somebody that's 19 years old learned it 25 years ago. They probably didn't.
So that's why if you have a question and you think, oh, well, maybe they'll find this stupid, or maybe some people out here who are listening to the podcast already know this. You don't know that. There's probably somebody like you who's having the exact same question.
Yeah, and if you write to us and you think, this is a stupid question, there are no stupid questions. There's only stupid answers, and we might give you one of those.
And with me, it's fully possible.
I've given a few stupid answers in my life, so that's entirely possible.
I have not been limited to a few.
Yeah, I know. I've seen them. Just let us know. Like I say, we're here to serve you. And please don't forget to support Life Dynamics. We can't do anything without your help.
And if you like this show, make sure you go subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, CastBox. The list goes on. Subscribing makes sure that you do not miss any episode. And the great thing about our show is it's free. You can subscribe for free on these platforms.
And free is good.
Free is good.
Free is always good.
Free is great.
Yeah, it is. Anyway, we'll be seeing you next week. Until then, remember, Life Dynamics is not here to put up a good fight.
We're here to win.
Because winning is how the killing stops. We'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye.